Alright, so today I'm going to be analyzing Day'Ron Sharpe at Summer League. Barring any trades or signings, Sharpe seems to be the backup center to Nick Claxton next season. This will be his first time getting consistent rotational minutes if everything stays the same. And the center position for the Nets is generally seen as the weak point of the roster, so I wanted to see what I could take away from his performance at Summer League. So today I'll be looking at his defense, his passing, and his screening. I'm going to start off by talking about the negatives that I noticed, and then talk about some of the more positive things later. So the first thing is the shot block chasing. There were multiple plays where Day'Ron Sharpe was chasing blocks that he had no chance of getting. This isn't a good thing, obviously, because if your center is chasing a block, their man isn't getting boxed out, and the opposing center can easily get an offensive rebound and a putback for a dunk or a layup. I will say though, as Summer League went on, he did this notably less, so I'm sure someone in the Nets coaching staff got in his ear and told him to stop chasing blocks that he had no chance of getting. In like the Milwaukee game, for example, I think I counted at least like 3 or 4 plays where he was chasing blocks that he didn't really have a chance. But, as Summer League went on, like I said, it was like maybe he had 1 chase block per game that he really didn't have a chance of getting. It's very like reminiscent of DeAndre Jordan in the 2021 season, right? But yeah, that was one of the first things that I immediately noticed with Day'Ron. So then next, I would say is defensive assertiveness. So there were times where Day'Ron was in the right place, but it didn't feel like he established a presence to deter an attempt at the rim. So for example, on this play, you have a pick and roll, and then you have another pick and roll with Mamu. Mamu slips and gets a rim attempt. I would say personally, he makes the right rotation in this slip. I would say probably when the ball is moving or being passed, Day'Ron probably needs to step up a little earlier to make it harder for Mamu to roll to the rim. But he steps up a little late, and then when he steps up, he goes up, but then he's moving to Mamu's side instead of rather just going straight up. So like you're making the correct rotation, or he's making the correct rotation. It's just that he's not establishing position and making it harder for Mamu to get off that rim attempt. But also, like, at least with the point of, Day'Ron should have stepping up earlier when the ball was in the air. That's a really hard decision and a really snap decision to make. It's very easy for me to say he should do this in the moment when I'm sitting looking at the game, compared to actually being in the game physically and having to process everything very quickly. So, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, like Day'Ron stepping up a little late, and then also when he jumps up, he jumps to his side rather than jumping straight up. I think that's an example of maybe needing to assert himself more defensively. So then in this play, Cam's guy attacks the rim, and what we see, Day'Ron just kind of lunges at him and then he backs off. So that's another play where I think the guard was pretty much predetermining what he wanted to do. He wanted to attack the rim, but Day'Ron doesn't like commit fully. He commits for a second and then backs off, and then the guard gets an easy layup at the rim. Another example of maybe Day'Ron needing to be more assertive. He had the right idea, but he just backed off for whatever reason. Your goal is to protect the rim, and he just didn't do that really. Right, so then next play, just kind of another example of like rotations and maybe being a little late and not assertive. So the Minnesota player attacks Raquan Gray and he gets a layup attempt, right? To me, again, it's an example of, I think Day'Ron's a little too late. When the Minnesota defender does the crossover and picks up the ball immediately after, I think Day'Ron needs to be sliding over or be established in that position. But then you see Day'Ron, kind of establishes himself, but he doesn't really deter the drive, and he doesn't close up that space fast enough to deter the drive. The defender ended up missing the shot, but I think that's just another example of like, he has the right idea, but he's not being assertive with it and not establishing position early. So then next, what I want to get into is the defensive versatility. Okay, all right, nice job, Miles. So defensive versatility is obviously very critical in the NBA, being able to play different coverages, whether it be playing drop coverage, whether it be playing, switching, whether it be hedging, how deep of a drop you're playing. It's really important to be able to do multiple things in order to stay on the court. So in Summer League, Day'Ron was primarily used in drop coverage, but there were moments where he was switched onto the perimeter, or he was guarding perimeter players and hedged in pick and roll. So in order, we're going to be looking at like drop coverage, then looking at hedging, and then we're going to be looking at him guarding the perimeter and switching onto defenders. So in this play, Beauchamp gets a handoff, and then he steps up into the 3. Day'Ron's playing a deep drop, but he does a pretty good job at contesting the jumper even though he's playing a deep drop. I think that's a pretty decent sign for him. Next play, attacking in a pick and roll, he plays drop, and he gets a block on, I think I want to say it's Wendell Moore. So Wendell Moore, pick and roll, the center, Day'Ron is guarding slips. Day'Ron's playing back to take away the center, and then he steps up as Wendell's getting closer to the rim, and he blocks like that running hook shot, right? So a good example of him playing drop coverage and playing both the center and then stepping up and playing the man, right? Then in this play, even though it's a little choppy, you see him like hedge and pick and roll a little bit, but the guard or the ball handler ends up getting around Day'Ron, and then he ends up committing to the guard until he passes the ball, and then he kind of scrams off into the corner, right? So that's just an example of him hedging and pick and roll. In this example, he's switched onto Beauchamp. I think the guard or one of the Bucks players ran pick and roll, and then Day'Ron ended up switching onto Beauchamp. So then Beauchamp tries to get in his bag on offense, and he ends up settling for a jumper that misses. It's good to see like Day'Ron not overreacting to what Beauchamp is doing. Like, for example, since the other person I'm going to compare Day'Ron to on the Nets roster is Claxton, like, you do any little thing to Claxton on offense and he's like overreacting all the time. He's like a Dance Dance Revolution player that is seeing the prompts, but he's hitting them way too early, and he's just overreacting way too much. Day'Ron, I feel like, does a good job, at least in this moment, just like remaining calm and just moving back and forth with Beauchamp and not overreacting and placing his feet too high or moving his hips in a way that open them up for avenues to attack, right? Okay, so then next, this is in transition. The Bucks player is bringing up the ball, passes it off to a Bucks player next to him, and Day'Ron picks him up, which is a good thing, right? And then Day'Ron is defending him on the perimeter. He attacks, drives, step back, and then he ends up missing the shot. I think even though obviously this Bucks player isn't like an NBA level player, being able to slide your feet and contain that defender and can get a good contest still, I think is still a pretty good job, at least in my opinion. Right. Next, we have he's guarding Josh Minott on the Timberwolves, who isn't an offensive player by any means. And that was like a very strange thing, and also like really smart thing from the Nets in that game, just having him guard Minott, because they knew he was an offensive player. But he's guarding him on the perimeter. Minott drives, and he ends up getting a block on the drive. I think this is pretty decent, even if Josh isn't an offensive player. I think what it shows is that Day'Ron is I wouldn't say pretty good, but I think what it shows is that Day'Ron has the ability to flip his hips really well, or decently enough to guard the perimeter maybe, and stay with his man and end up, still being an impactful defender in some way, right? Because as soon as he, as soon as he, turns the corner, really, Day'Ron has flipped his hips, and he's still in front of him, and he ends up getting the block. So I would say that's a pretty good job by Day'Ron. Obviously, like I said, Josh isn't an elite offensive player by any means. That's not his forte. His forte is, defense. But it's good to see Day'Ron opening up his hips really quickly and stopping a drive attempt at the rim and getting a block shot, right? So then I want to say the next thing that we have are like positive defensive rotations, right? So on this first play, the Bucks run pick and pop with Mamu. The Bucks have two to the ball. It's Alondes, Williams, and Kessler. I think Alondes messed up because you can see Kessler, kind of extend his arm to Alondes, signaling like, no, that shouldn't have happened. You should be switching, right? But Day'Ron abandons his man and goes to take on Mamu, and he presses up on him to force a travel. I think that's pretty good example of a positive rotation, being able to switch onto a situation like that, knowing that the Nets were in danger and Mamu would have had a wide open 3. Right, so the next play, you see here, like, Day'Ron's doing like the 2.9 where it's like you obviously can't stay in the paint for 3 seconds, so he steps outside and resets so he doesn't get called for a 3-second violation. And he obviously recognizes that Cam has a mismatch and that he comes over to take that mismatch on the post up and have Cam scram off to whatever assignment he can find, which ended up being whoever this guy is in the top of the key. So then Jaden Springer ends up driving after receiving the cross-court pass, and he gets 2 to the ball, and the guy in the opposing dunker spot is wide open, and Day'Ron makes that rotation. Although I'm glad he makes the rotation, but he goes for a really shitty steal attempt, though it didn't end up. Oh, okay, so he ended up making the shot. But yeah, I think that's 2 good rotations from Day'Ron, even if he goes for a really bad steal attempt, right? I still think that is the right rotation. He just needs to be more disciplined and not, trying to go for that steal that he doesn't really have a chance for, right? So the next play, Day'Ron's guarding the paint, Josh Minott slips, and he ends up stepping up for a rotation. So again, pick and roll, Josh slips the pick and roll because he gets 2 to the ball. He gets the ball, Day'Ron steps up to deter the rim attempt, and Josh is forced to pass, and the ball ends up getting deflected. Again, another good example of being a positive rotator on defense, being able to take away the rim attempt and forcing, the Timberwolves player into forced passing the ball, right? So the next play we see here, Day'Ron's guarding on the perimeter, and Day'Ron is on Wendell Moore Jr., I want to say, so closes out a little too hard on Wendell, but he flips his hips pretty well, and he stays with Wendell Moore to prevent the shot attempt at the rim. So then number 22 on the Nets ends up losing his guy on the baseline, and Day'Ron closes out a little too hard, but he again recovers pretty decently, and again stops the drive. Also helps that Cam digged at the ball to make him pick up the ball, but again, I feel like he did a pretty good job here, being able to stay with his defender after initially closing out pretty poorly, or pretty strongly. I wouldn't say poorly, but closing out pretty strong, being able to flip his hips, stay with his man, and then also make that like emergency rotation, even though it wasn't his responsibility, of going to the weak side corner or the strong side corner in that moment, and making that rotation, after his man or his teammate lost his guy, right? So there's that. Next, I would say screening. So the screening is kind of interesting. So I think he was used in different ways as a screener, whether it be doing bottom side screens, holding his screens, doing touch and goes, and doing slips. For me, the touch and goes and slips are a little bit harder to determine. I wouldn't say like how good he'll be at it, because I don't think Summer League is the environment for him to succeed at doing touch and goes and slips, because the only positive passer on the Nets at the moment was Alondes Williams, and he was limited in the half court, right? But I still think he showed out as like a positive screener in Summer League. So like, for example, in this first play, Cam's bringing up the ball and Day'Ron does like a bottom side screen. Now, whether it was intentional or not, I don't know, but it very clearly is a bottom side screen. And what makes it a bottom side screen is that a bottom side screen is basically when you're screening someone's ass instead of normally screening someone's hips, right? And the reason why you do a bottom side screen is to make it so that the opposing defender has to go over rather than going under, so you're forcing them to chase from behind. So he does the bottom side screen there and frees up Cam a little bit. Even though Cam snakes the pick and roll a little too early, they still score, right? So then next play, he does a screen on the hip of the Philly defender, and it frees up David Duke for the jumper. David Duke Jr.'s speed with the jumper was a little slow. If it was a little faster, he probably would have gotten a faster, cleaner look, right? But still, I think Day'Ron does a good job of getting the screen and holding it to create the advantage for David Duke. It's just that the jumper was a little slow, and the defender was able to get back in the play. Then next, Day'Ron doing a handoff for Cam and getting Cam an advantage. I think he does a good job holding the initial screen and creating an advantage for Cam. Jaden Springer is a really good screen navigator, and Jaden Springer does a really good job of getting back at the hip and getting back in front to make the shot harder for Cam that he ends up missing. But I think Day'Ron's screen does a good job of creating like the initial advantage for Cam to get in the paint and get a paint touch, even though he misses. right? So then next play, gets the ball at the nail. So then here, I want to say it's a slip after, yeah, so it's an immediate slip after he gives the handoff to David Duke Jr., slips, rolls to the rim, and David Duke finishes with the extended arm, right? And then the next one is a touch and go. So you see, he goes up to set a screen, and instead of like actually screening his hips or Jaden Springer's hips, he just touches him with his arms, extends the arms, and then he just rolls to the rim. That's generally what a touch and go is, meant to more create confusion with the defense, right? But he was definitely used in a different variety or different contexts as a screener, right? Then lastly, or not lastly, but next we have, I want to say, the passing. So this is obviously like my favorite part of Day'Ron. So, and we're going to go in like progressively easier. We're going to go in like easier moments to more difficult moments, right, as a passer. So first, Milwaukee players isolating, shoots the ball, Day'Ron gets the ball, transition hit ahead over the Bucks defender so it doesn't get deflected, gets to Raekwon Gray, and then Gray hits David Duke Jr. for transition layup. Just an easy like hit ahead to start the break. It's just a good pass in stride, doesn't have to slow down to get it that much, and leads to a fast break opportunity, right? So the next play, Day'Ron's bringing up the ball and he throws a bounce pass in stride that Kessler Edwards finishes for the layup. Right, again, being able to throw a pass on target in stride and being able to lead for a transition play is good, right? Next play, I would say, this is handoff scenario. Throws a bounce pass in stride to David Duke Jr. for the layup. This also shows some like veteran craft to me, right? So what Day'Ron does is after David Duke goes around him, right, he extends like his ass out basically, or like hinges his hips to extend his ass out. So he basically like eliminates David Duke's defender. So then, he can't recover in time. And then he throws the bounce pass to like David Duke Jr., who then finishes with his inside hand. That's something that's really crafty and something like a lot of veterans do. I want to say Kevin Garnett and like Andrew Bogut used to do that a lot. I might be totally wrong on that, but I want to say like someone in the league that may not be playing anymore used to do that a ton. But that's definitely something that's really good to have. Right, next, this is probably like his most replicable pass that you'll see from Summer League, right, in terms of like the Nets context. Alondes, gets a drive to the rim. He has basically like 3 players collapse on him, 4 players looking at him. He throws the ball to Day'Ron, who's like cutting towards the middle. Day'Ron immediately reads Beauchamp, and then he hits David Duke Jr. for the 3, right? That's something that's really more what you're going to see in the league with Day'Ron, right? Being put in like short roll scenarios, short roll cutting slip scenarios where he's going towards the middle and then has to read and process the court and make plays out of it, right? This is like some of the best passes that he's thrown, stuff involving like court mapping and just accuracy, right? So he gets the ball on a post up, turns over his shoulder. He probably sees Jaden Springer helping a little too far at some point, and then he just throws the ball across court to Cam just in his shooting pocket. Right, immediately in the shooting pocket, and Cam ends up missing. But again, example of like a really good pass with great touch and the ability to read the court in that moment. So then, Day'Ron flips the screen, gets the ball on the roll. He misses the 2 putback attempts, but at some point he recognizes that 17 is in the right side corner, and then after he misses the layup attempt or putback attempt, right, he gets the ball and just throws this crazy bounce pass that's so accurate to the corner. Like, again, you just don't see centers throw these passes, especially young centers. It's just amazing seeing him have like that court mapping of understanding where his teammates are in these scenarios and being able to throw like accurate passes. It's just super impressive. All right, so the next pass gets the offensive rebound. He's basically being forced towards the baseline, and he recognizes that he has Kessler Edwards right behind him. So then he just throws a pass behind his head to Kessler Edwards, right? And it's just insane understanding, where his teammates are in those moments and being able to throw those passes and having the guts to throw those passes is super impressive, right? To me, I think like Day'Ron is. I would go out on a limb and say I think Day'Ron's already like one of the best passing centers in the league. Obviously he hasn't gotten like the minutes and reps, and he's not like elite, but just like his court mapping and his accuracy is really good for a young player, especially at a center position, and it's just super impressive to see him do it. The one thing that I would say about his passing, and I talked about this with someone in Vegas, is that the one skill that he's really good at is his passing, right? And the thing is with passing, especially for centers, passing is a skill that increases your ceiling as a center, but it doesn't exactly increase your floor as a center, right? What gets you on the court as a center is, rim protection, screening, but mostly like rim protection, screening, and play finishing, right? Playmaking doesn't get you on the court as a center. Like we saw that with Blake Griffin last year, where he was a really good connector, but his finishing at the rim wasn't as good this year as it was last year, and the perimeter shooting just totally went away. So while he is really good at passing, it's more important that he gets better and develops as a rim protector and a play finisher. All right, so then actually lastly we have the offensive seals. So something that, if anybody paid attention to the Cleveland Cavaliers this year and Jared Allen, something that he developed offensively is that the ability to establish offensive position early and take advantage of burying defenders underneath the rim. Day'Ron flashed the ability to do that in Summer League a little bit. So like in this play, for example, runs a pick and roll with David Duke Jr. He gets a switch and he immediately just goes into the paint, try to bury the defender, but the spacing is too bad because Raquan Gray is like posting up and doesn't really get him the ball. But again, like having the immediate awareness to be like, I have a smaller guy on me, I'm going to park myself in the paint and try to take advantage of it is good awareness, right? Even if that's not going to be Day'Ron's game in the next level, I think showing that's really good. And then this is like pushing in semi-transition or pushing in transition. You already see Day'Ron has, a guard or wing on him, and he's just trying to establish position in the paint. He's right outside the restricted circle, right? He's being denied the ball by Alondes, right? So Alondes swings the ball or reverses the ball, and then Raquan Gray hits him for the layup, right? So again, being able to establish position early on and bury defenders to get easy points is really important. So in conclusion, I think Day'Ron showed decent flashes in Summer League. Defensively is where Day'Ron is going to have to make his mark going forward. He has to get rid of the bad habit of chasing blocks when he shouldn't. He has shown he can play multiple coverages, but it becomes a question of how well he can play those coverages against NBA level talent, and can he play one well enough to stay on the court. He needs to improve his defensive processing a little bit, but that should hopefully come with time and game reps. I think at this point in his career, he's a better screener than Claxton and has shown the ability to be used as a screener in different ways. His feel for the game as a passer is great, and it's reflected in his passing ability with his court mapping, touch, and accuracy. Being able to recognize mismatches and bury defenders underneath the rim is good awareness and an easy way for him to get involved. As I said, I think he showed good flashes in Summer League, and it'll be interesting to see how he performs in Brooklyn this year. Thanks for watching.